Hello everyone, my name is Surina Taneja, and for those of you who are new here, my name's Surina Taneja. What? Hello everyone, my name's Surina Taneja. For those of you who are new here, I'm a junior doctor working in the UK, and I recently passed the MRCS Part A, which is the first postgraduate surgical exam you need to pass if you want to be a surgeon in the UK. I've made a video going into a lot of detail about the exam itself and the resources that I used to help me pass. And after that, I had a few requests asking me to go into more detail about exactly how I revised and how I actually tackled the syllabus. So I've made this video today, going into more detail, so I hope you enjoy it and see you at the end. When starting out planning your revision route, you need to find yourself a map. And for that, I would recommend going to the MRCS syllabus. If you just Google MRCS Part A syllabus, you'll find it on the RCS website. It basically takes you through all the topics that appear in both papers, and most importantly, show you roughly on average how many questions come up for each topic. This is really important because it gives you a guide of how long to spend on topics, how long they might take to cover, and which ones you need to prioritize. Generally speaking, if you can spend around 2 or 3 hours a day of revision, then you probably need around 4 months in total to get through the content. If you think you've got less than that, then obviously extend the time, and vice versa if you've got more time to dedicate to the exam on a daily basis. I basically looked at that list and decided to start at anatomy because that was an area of weakness for me. So I knew it would take me the longest to go through and cover. I looked at anatomy and broke it down into subsections. So firstly with splitting it across the body, so head and neck, thorax, upper limb, abdomen, pelvis and perineum, and lower limb, just like it's split up on the syllabus itself. And then went into more detail, splitting up each of those topics into even smaller subheadings. When I'd picked a topic to start on, so for example, upper limb, I wrote down all the subheadings within it and everything I needed to cover, or rather wanted to cover. Then I'd look at the week ahead, look at what shifts I have, what other commitments I have, and basically make a rough plan of what I think I could realistically cover in that week. Do not expect to be able to cover the entirety of the topic before you allow yourself to move on. The more you do, the more detail you'll start to understand things in, and the more you'll keep doing. And it's very easy to lose sight of the bigger picture and of the whole syllabus and just how much is left to cover. So if you think you're spending too long on one thing, just move on. Try something different and come back to that later if you have time. And that's the reason why in my last video I recommended doing questions and revising at the same time, because as you begin to understand which concepts and which topics are coming up again and again, you know to focus your revision in those areas more, and you can make an educated decision to just move on. Okay, so now let's jump into my actual workflow. Like I mentioned, I started with anatomy, split them up into area of the body, so lower limb, upper limb, thorax. Then I split them up into even smaller topics to make them easier to get through and make sure I covered them in the detail required for the exam. What I would recommend is finding an anatomy textbook that you like, maybe something you're familiar with from medical school or just something you enjoy using. I went with the Gray's Anatomy textbook for students. I used it at medical school and I had online access as well. And what I would do is, once I picked a section of the body I want to start on, so for example lower limb, I would basically see what subheadings that the textbook had split it down into. So as you can see here in the contents page for lower limb, there's lots of sections that the book has split it up into, and I would use these subheadings to help me guide what I wanted to put in my own set of notes. So here are my set of notes on Word. You can see my subheadings on the side here. So I've gone with bones, vascular supply, the gluteal region, the thigh, the foot, and then some nerve plexuses, nerve plexi actually, I think, on the side. So you can split up anatomy in different ways. You can do it either by region, so the gluteal region, the thigh, the foot, for example, or you can split it up into the type of anatomy, so vessels, nerves, bones, muscles, and so on. It basically depends how you understand it best and what you prefer. As you can see with my notes, I've gone with a bit of a hybrid. I've got bones and vascular supply up here, but I've also got regional anatomy, so gluteal, thigh and foot here, because that's how I best understood it. Within each of these subheadings then, I would basically use resources like the Gray's textbook, like YouTube, and like teach me anatomy. I'd really make sure I made it as concise as possible and just put things down that were, very much need to know. And because I'm a very visual learner, every concept is accompanied by some illustration. The important thing to know is that these side headings are constantly evolving. As you read more and as you do more questions, you see which topics are coming up more, and you can then adapt your notes to make sure you've got all the right information you need here. For example, within the thigh, I noticed when I was doing questions, there were lots of questions coming up on a certain area in the leg called the femoral triangle and the femoral canal. So I added these sections to my notes, making sure that, again, there were good illustrations, there were good ways to remember the structures in these areas, and then just plug them in under the subheading of the thigh, within the subheading of the medial thigh, making sure that these were very well explained, because I knew lots of questions were coming up in my practice, and so a lot of questions are likely to come up in the actual exam as well. So that's what I mean by this process being constantly evolving, and you'll constantly be adding to each of these headings as you do more questions and as you read more. Just to recap that, firstly, find a textbook you enjoy using, use it to help you figure out some subheadings within these anatomy categories. Then, as you read and as you do questions, keep adding to these subheadings, keep adding things that you know are coming up very often. And as the months pass, you'll notice that your notes become more and more comprehensive, and you'll be left with a really nice reference point, which is very specific to your exam and something that you know how to use easily and can navigate through. Because, the more and more you learn, you'll also start to forget things and want to recap them quickly. So you need somewhere that you can go quickly, review something, and then move on. So another powerful note-making tool I wanted to talk to you about is something called Notion. And it's something I discovered quite late during my revision time, but it is something that if I was to start revising for a new exam now, I would definitely recommend and use. I did have a little play around with it, and I thought I'd show you some really good ways to use this to help you with your revision. To show you my own Notion, you can see I've got lots of pages here for things that I use Notion for, and here is a MRCS Part A revision tracker that I made, and I've split it up into all the topics from the syllabus and also all the numbers of questions that appear for each topic, just so you can see at a glance which topics you want to focus more on. So if we click on the abdomen, it takes me through to my abdomen notes, and we can open it as a page. And again, here I've got the number of questions that come up, and here is a contents page. If we click on, for example, vascular supply of the gut, it takes you to my notes, and I've basically organized everything into even smaller subheadings within that, and used this amazing toggle feature to pack loads of information up into a really small amount of space. So unlike my Word documents, which are pages and pages and lots of scrolling, you can actually see everything at a glance. And that's my first favourite thing about Notion. Secondly, these toggle features essentially help you recall things as well as just writing them down. So making notes, it's quite a passive process. You're not really using the part of your brain that you need in the exam to recall knowledge quickly and recall it accurately. Recall is actually built into Notion with these toggles. So for example, after I'm done making my notes, I can kind of go back and review them and ask myself questions. So with abdominal aorta, I can ask what are the branches of the abdominal aorta, actively think about it, try and remember it, and then reveal the notes and see which ones I got right and wrong. If I want to remember the branches of the celiac trunk, I can think about it, then open it up and see whether I got it right. It allows for a lot more regular and consistent active recall into your note making. I think one of the traps that I fall into is just focusing too much on making notes and not actually working on recalling those facts and retaining them in my brain. So obviously doing questions on the question banks is a really good way to engage that side of your brain, but I think building that system into your note-making system as well adds that extra layer of active recall in everything you do. So yeah, I'm a really big fan of Notion, if you haven't already guessed, and I would really recommend you use it if you're someone who likes making notes. So I've been a visual learner my whole life, and I really like having pictures and videos to help me understand concepts and remember them a lot better for the exam. But if I can take that one step further and actually learn how to draw it, that extra layer of sort of visuospatial understanding really helps me cement it in my mind. First time I sat the exam, I had a trusty sketchbook, which I used alongside my written notes. And any important anatomy that was being tested again and again, specific areas of the body where structures are quite close together or laid out in a particular order that you need to know, I always made sure to note them down in here as well. So you can see I've just got lots of different diagrams for vasculature, for areas in the body like the popliteal fossa here, the femoral triangle that I mentioned earlier. Just the process of drawing these structures out not only made revision more enjoyable, but I was able to kind of see these images in my head a lot more clearer because I had actually had practice in drawing them. So if that's something that works for you, I'd recommend having sort of a stash of drawing somewhere. The second time I sat the exam, I had the luxury of having this iPad to draw on. So I made lots of separate notebooks for each topic and basically did the same thing. So I had lots of illustrations in here. If you want to know more about which apps I used and how I did these drawings, then check out my Revise With Me video, which you can find on my channel, and I go through this in a lot more detail. Okay, so I know that was quite anatomy focused, but with all of the other topics, I basically had the exact same workflow. So for physiology and pathology, I used the basic sciences for the MRCS textbook. That's where I got my subheadings from, wrote those out in a Word document, and again populated them with notes from the textbook and from the questions, refining them as I went along. And I, still used pictures and diagrams where I could, either on paper or on my iPad, to help me map out sort of physiological processes. For paper 2, which is a lot more clinically orientated, I used my medical school notes, which I'd made from the Oxford Handbook of Medicine and the Oxford Handbook of Surgery, as well as using the textbook on EMRCS as well. Again, that's where I got my subheadings, and those are the resources I used to populate those subheadings. As far as the small topics go, like microbiology, pharmacology, ethics, there's barely a handful of questions that come up underneath those topics, so there's really no point spending a lot of time on them. Out of 300 questions, we're looking at 5 or 6 questions per topic. Of course, every mark counts, but I would not sit down and find specific resources and specific textbooks for those questions and try and learn them inside out like I did for the other topics. Just see how they come up in the question banks. Use that to guide what you want to read. It's very clinically orientated and it's very practical in terms of things you might actually see on the job. So just use the questions to guide you for that. Okay, I hope you found that useful. As always, if you have any more questions, feel free to message me or comment down below, and check out my channel for other MRCS videos, and there are more to be coming soon, so make sure you subscribe as well. Thank you for watching and see you soon.